What's going on, everybody? It's NJ Glooper. I'm a little bit late. Got stuck doing a little bit of work on my day off, but such is the life. I'm going to be reading Chapter 10 of Sources of Power by Gary Klein. We got stuck in a rut on Chapter 9, and I am not going to continue reading it. I went through the key points and the applications at the end by myself, and it was very redundant. I didn't find any use out of it. So sometimes when you read a book, you don't have to 100% it. You don't have to read everything. Sometimes there's no utility in that. Sometimes you're just, spinning your wheels. There's no use. So we'll just get right on. We'll move right along to Chapter 10. And Chapter 10 is titled The Power to See the Invisible. So let's jump right in. If anybody wants to ask a question or talk about the book at any point, feel free to request. And if I think you'll add to the conversation, I'll bring you up. All right, but let's get started. Chapter 10. This chapter is about expertise. One view of experts is that they have accumulated lots of knowledge. While this is undoubtedly true, it conveys an image of people whose brains are filled with facts, heavy with memories, weighed down with wisdom. In many fields, the time needed to develop expertise is up to 10 years. Everyone talks about the 10,000 hours rule, the rule of thumb that to be an expert in anything, you need to put in 10,000 hours of work or at least focused effort into the field. And then you can call yourself an expert. Thus, we see a relationship between expertise and age. This reinforces the image of experts as slow-moving creatures who may talk and think slowly because they must search through so much information. This chapter presents a different image of experts based on the highly skilled people we have observed, interviewed, and studied in different domains. The accumulation of experience does not weigh people down, it lightens them up. Experts see the world differently. They see things the rest of us cannot. And often experts do not realize that the rest of us are unable to detect what seems obvious to them. An analogy may help to illustrate this point. Many years ago, I had the following experience. After a long day of work, I got ready for bed. While I was waiting for my wife to finish work on an article she was writing, I dozed off. I must have been lying there on my side for about 20 or 25 minutes, with one eye pressed down into the pillow and the other exposed to the overhead light. My wife came in and turned off the light so that the room was dark. This woke me, and when I sat up, I had the distinct feeling that one of my eyeballs had fallen out of my face. What happened to me was that while I was laying on the bed, the eye that was pressed into the pillow was shielded from the light. Rhodopsin, the chemical responsible for night vision, was regenerating in that eye. By the time my wife came in, the chemical was up to its maximum, and that eye could detect objects under even very low illumination. The other eye had been exposed to the light, and the rhodopsin in it was continuing to be depleted. The sensitivity of the chemical makes it effective in the dark, just as it makes it vulnerable to being bleached out by light. When my wife turned out the light and I sat up, I had one eye that could see fairly well, the one that was pressed into the pillow, and one that was completely useless. The contrast was so strong that I had the sensation that there was a decent amount of light in the room, but that one of my eyes had ceased to work. I rubbed the eye to see if that would help, but it didn't. I felt around on the blankets to see if it had rolled out somewhere. Not finding it, I jumped out of bed and stumbled into the bathroom. I turned on the light and looked in the mirror. Happily, my eye was still sitting there next to my nose, where it had always been. I could now see with that eye. Very bizarre, I thought. With trepidation, I turned out the light and found that now I could not see well out of either eye. Then I figured out what had happened. I've gone into this incident at length to reinforce the image of the contrast between being able to see versus being totally in the dark. Because of their experience, experts have learned to see all kinds of things that are invisible to others. That is why they can move freely in their domains, while novices must pick their way very carefully through the same terrain. This incident also shows that the light-exposed eye does not know what is missing. It cannot sense what it is like to see inside those dark shadows. There are many things experts can see that are invisible to everyone else. Here are some examples. Patterns that novices do not notice. Anomalies, events that did not happen, and other violations of expectancies. And the big picture, situation awareness. Experts see the way things work, while novices do not. Opportunities and improvisations. Events that either already happened or are going to happen. Differences that are too small for novices to detect. Their own limitations. And these are just a few. It keeps going, but these aspects of expertise can be tied to the two primary sources of power we have been examining: pattern matching and mental simulation. Pattern matching, or otherwise known as intuition, refers to the ability of the expert to detect typicality and to notice events that didn't happen and other anomalies that violate the pattern. Mental simulation covers the ability to see events that happened previously and events that are likely to happen in the future. So those two things, I feel like we can just think of some experts right now. There's the classic case of, I think it was Paul Krugman, who was supposed to be an expert. He was the one who said that the internet wasn't going to amount to anything. He said that the internet was going to be a fad or just a phase, and we were going to move on to the next thing. So he was seemingly an expert, and he was using his, I guess, pattern matching, or maybe his, maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was just, sniffing his own farts. Maybe he was getting his own head. And he said that the internet was going to be completely useless. We had all the people these supposed experts who were telling us that COVID-19 was going to kill millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, that it was a deadly virus that was going to wreak havoc on a global scale, when really it was just another flu, or, the sniffles that, preyed on old people more than younger people, whatever. The idea that experts are infallible, obviously, that's not true, but they were using their pattern recognition and mental simulation to see into the future and try and match it with other patterns they had recognized in the past. But again, sensationalism, that's going to take a you would say would account more for their analysis than probably anything else. Also, the fact that the CDC had a big part to play in conjuring up all this fear. So that's not a particularly good example of. And one thing that he mentions in this book, one thing Gary Klein mentions, is that typically these processes are only good when it comes from a single expert. When it comes from an organization, it actually breaks down the process of generating these mental simulations. So calling the CDC's prediction, kind of weighing it against a true expert's opinion, isn't really valid. So let me think of a better expert. Someone like, let's see, so who's a singular expert who has, predicted the future in a sense. People would call conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones maybe an expert conspiracy theorist, but we know his dad was politically and connected to government agencies, so he might have information that nobody else has, and he might not even be an expert. He might just be an expert media host. I can think of one expert in my field. There's the guy Andre Carpathy. He's Carpathy. I don't know how you say his name, but he's the guy who worked at OpenAI, and he was one of the I don't want to say founders, but definitely one of the lead engineers who was working on the I guess research aspects of everything, trying to learn more about how AI works and develop new methods for training the AI or tokenizing or any of these, obscure facets of the process of training an LLM. But he's one of these guys that predicted that it's going to get cheaper. You're going to see LLM OSs. He's making a learning series right now about how to break into the field for total beginners to go from zero to hero. So he's an interesting guy in the field. He's definitely what I would consider an expert. He's written a lot of these LLMs from scratch. Like, that's actually quite hard to do, and something that is almost painful. It seems like an exercise in futility, because you could just use someone else's code and use a library, code library, to do what you want with way less effort, and almost no code actually. But he's taking all those abstractions away and writing it himself, and he's revealing a lot of things that a lot of people didn't know about the field. And it's kind of like if you were to take apart a Tesla and reveal all the intricacies, if you knew how cars worked or electric motors or batteries or whatever, and you started taking it apart, you could reveal some things about the process of manufacturing a Tesla, or where the parts were sourced from, or what kind of contracts they have with certain companies to make the parts and stuff like that. So he's breaking it down, and he's revealing a lot of the technique and what's missing and things like that a lot of people who aren't experts would miss. And it's really good. That's like the first example that comes to mind of a singular expert. A lot of the times these guys get subsumed into larger corporations, or they're part of a team and they're kind of faceless. They actually, they're a figurehead and they don't actually do the technical work anymore. They're just consultants, or it's like a cult of personality, like they're a figurehead solely, like Bill Gates and Microsoft. So trying to figure out like real experts. A lot of these guys just do their own thing now. I'm thinking a lot of the gun experts on YouTube, or like the YouTuber gun experts and stuff like that. These guys are usually solo guys. I can think of a lot of the podcast guys, like the Marine, Global War on Terror kind of guys. These guys are definitely experts, and once they retire, they retain all their knowledge, and they're still experts in their field. They have a lot of knowledge and insights that they can give that nobody else can. And you could ask the government, or you could put in a freedom of information request in for these things, and you'll never get an answer. The bureaucracy will take too long, or it'll won't give you exactly what you're looking for. But these guys just they'll answer your questions either in YouTube comments, or in some kind of request for a video. Or if you can get to talk to them through their like Patreon network or something, they will just reveal things to you that you would never get in any memoir, any book. So there's a lot of experts out there that they're not really in the game anymore. They're not really part of any system or any organization. Technically, they don't have any professional capacity, or they're not in any professional position, but they still have all the qualities of an expert. And these guys are definitely who you would want to ask certain things for, rather than some some bureaucrat or some junior. Even the C-suite executives who supposedly run the companies probably don't have even a tenth of the knowledge that these experts have, and that's why they're there. So anyways, I digress. So these aspects of expertise can be tied to the two primary sources of power we've been examining: pattern matching and mental simulation. We also encounter some additional sources of power. The ability to make fine discriminations must involve some sort of perceptual learning. Not a great deal is known about this type of learning, and it does seem to be different from pattern matching. In addition, the ability to see one's own limitations and to manage around these seems distinct from other functions under discussion. The following sections describe these 8 aspects of expertise. Patterns. The secretary problem illustrates what it means to recognize typicality. Consider a case where the new managers of an organization need to hire their first secretary. They may go through a lengthy process to define the job requirements and criteria and then interview many secretaries. They are novice secretary selectors. In contrast, office managers who have been in charge of large secretary pools for a long time would not have to interview many people. They are experienced secretary selectors. They might interview the first candidate on a list and recognize that he or she is much better than the average. They don't need to look any further. The novices who need to interview many applicants are developing a sense of how secretaries differ, how much variability there is in between them, and what a strong candidate, one who is better than the average, looks like. The experienced office managers would have a good sense of typicality and could recognize a superior candidate without having to go through the learning process. Novices have difficulty seeing relationships that are obvious to experts. We found that fireground commanders could look at a burning building and know what was happening inside. They could envision stairways, elevator shafts, and roof supports, and how each was being affected by the fire. Chapter 4 on the power of intuition discussed how our ability to see patterns gives us situation awareness, which helps us recognize appropriate goals and relevant cues. People who are not experts will have trouble detecting typical patterns. So we've reached our first example of the chapter, example 10.1, the instructors who couldn't save their own lives. In 1981, my wife, Helen, and I conducted a study of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, or CPR. And this is written about by Klein and Klein in 1981. I assume one of those is Gary Klein, the author of the last book we read, Thinking Fast and Slow. We prepared 6 videotapes of people performing CPR on a red-haired life-saving dummy called Resusci-Annie. 5 of the videotapes showed relative novices, people who had completed an 8-hour course on CPR. The 6th videotape showed a paramedic. We played these videotapes to 3 audiences, 10 novices who had just finished an 8-hour CPR course, 10 CPR instructors who were experienced teachers but had never performed CPR on an actual victim, and 10 paramedics who had used CPR many times. The study called for the participants to make a series of judgments. The last one was perhaps the most interesting. We asked each participant to imagine that it was his or her own life on the line. They had to identify one of 6 people in the videotapes who they would want to do CPR on them. The paramedics recognized expertise when they saw it. 9 of the 10 picked the actual paramedic. When asked why, they could not point to any one thing. It was the entire pattern of his behavior, the smoothness with which he worked, that they liked. He seemed to know what he was doing. The novices, too, generally chose the paramedic. He got 5 of their 10 votes. The instructors did not do so well. The paramedic in the tape was not following the rules they taught so carefully to their students. He wasn't carefully measuring where to put his hands, for example. Only 3 of the instructors chose him to save their lives. So yeah, that's the classic case of being a lab coat or being someone in the process, like the bureaucrat. They do not recognize expertise. They are not an expert, and all they know is the rule book. They've never actually been in the field, and they can't identify what it looks like to be in the field. They couldn't, and this is the important distinction here, is they couldn't distinguish between an expert or a novice in the field. All they know is the handbook, so that's pretty bad. One more reason to be skeptical of someone who's been in the bureaucracy too long, someone who's just like a stodgy necktie, who's been, nose down in the paperwork for way too long. They can tell you all about the process, but they can't tell you what it looks like when it's actually being handled or when it's actually being carried out. They don't know what it's like to be in the hood. They don't know what it's like to be on the streets. All they know is, the rules of the game, which, can only get you so far. Anomalies. So we just learned about patterns. Now we're going to learn about anomalies. Novices are confused by much that happens to them because they have so much trouble forming expectancies. All right. Just need my screen to listen to my input. What's going on here? I can't get my Kindle to listen to me. Give me 1 second. Not what I want. Not what I want. I apologize. I'm having technical difficulties. Sometimes the touchscreen just does not respond. I'm going to turn the screen off and turn it back on. Like I said earlier, if anybody has anything to add, if you want to discuss the book or just talk about what's on your mind, feel free to request. And if I think you'll add to the conversation, I'll bring you guys up. Okay, here we go. Anomalies. Okay, they keep encountering events they did not anticipate. As they begin to form expectancies, they also begin to get surprised each time an expectancy is violated. One critical type of cue that surprises experts, but not novices, is the absence of a key event. Since novices do not know what is supposed to happen, they are slow to appreciate the significance of something's not happening. Experts pick this up right away. So the negative cue. This is the sign, this is a mark of the expert. So not only is it experts who are able to pick out other experts before others do, the sign of an expert is to pick up on the negative cue, to pick up on what nobody else notices. Here is an example of the importance of experience in noticing a missing event. Several years ago, a new researcher joined my staff. After a few months, she commented on how we always worked on the edge, barely making deadlines. That wasn't my perception at all. I thought we had made great progress in becoming more orderly and less crisis-driven. In talking with her, I realized that while she had been with us, there had been a report and a proposal that went out pretty close to the wire. We had also submitted 10 other proposals that had gone out smoothly. I knew that because the previous year, a set of 10 proposals had almost overwhelmed our office staff, so I noticed how calmly the work had gone recently. The new senior researcher did not have that background. She did not notice the absence of frenzy when the 10 proposals went out. That type of cue, a missing event, is invisible to novices. These missing events can be described as negative cues. Experience is important for allowing decision makers to form and use expectancies. Yeah, so how useful is pattern recognition and being able to predict the future or whatever if you can't describe what is missing? If you can't, so like imagine you have a map and there's a hole in the map. The novice won't even notice the hole. They'll think it was supposed to be that way. They'll think the map was drawn that way on purpose. They'll navigate to that area or they'll be in that area and they'll think nothing's wrong. They'll think, hey, the map told me that I'm supposed to expect this. And that will, obviously that might change if they actually get to the area and they look around and it doesn't match the map. That's when things go wrong. But the expert, before even thinking about it, they'll just notice a hole in the map or they'll see what's missing. And that's the negative cue. They react to the absence of information. They react to the negative pattern, something missing, something that nobody else can notice. Only the expert would know. You can think of like a cab driver who's looking at, maybe someone's got the phone up and they're like, I think we should turn left here. My map says to turn left. My phone says we should turn left here. And, the expert cabbie has been driving around this area for his entire life. He's going to say, no, there's new construction here and you act like the road's closed or, that road flooded 10 years ago and actually they don't let you go through that way anymore. They just haven't updated the app. And, the passenger might get really upset. They might say like, well, is this person like lying to me? Are they taking me out of the way to charge my rate, to charge a higher rate, to run the rate meter up? Why are they taking me out of the way? Is this like a human trafficking thing? And they're not experts. They should just defer to the cab driver. Obviously, you should be skeptical of experts. They may have ulterior motives. They may be making something up, but the fact that he recognized the cue of like, hey, you're trying to tell me to go somewhere where I clearly know more about it than you do. That's like that's the power of an expert, man. You should trust the expert over your Google Maps thing or whatever, because I'm sure it's out of date. I'm sure the cab driver knows more. So as long as he's like a conscientious guy, as long as he's like a morally upright, conscientious guy, you should defer to him. You should defer to the expert. But we live in a fallen world. You can't trust everybody. You gotta gotta have your neck on a swivel. You got to protect your neck, okay? No one else is looking out for you. You're the only one. So definitely challenge an expert if you're not sure, if you think they have ulterior motives. But yeah, the hole in the map, that's the classic example where only the grizzlied expert who's been there millions of times will be able to tell you, yeah, something's missing here, okay? I know you haven't been here, but I have. And that's the negative cue. So only through expectancies can someone notice that something did not happen. One of Arthur Conan Doyle's stories shows that Sherlock Holmes solved the case using his ability to notice what did not happen. That's crazy. I'm actually reading that book right now. And that book is a study in Scarlet, by the way. Halfway through it, I just tore through. I was like, it's such a good read. I was reading probably 6 months ago, maybe a year ago now. I was reading The Spy Who Came In From the Cold on recommendation from Wendell. And like that is a fantastic read. That one, I could not put the book down. That was one of those books where it's a real page turner. Like it's reading itself. You just can't get enough of it. You got to go through the whole thing. You want to know what's happening next. It's so well written, and you don't really know the difference between a really well written book and a really crappy book unless you've read really bad and really good books. And going through the language of like a textbook or going through a book written by someone who's ESL, someone who does not have English as their first language, it's immediately apparent. Going from directly from The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, which is amazing, and then reading Thinking Fast and Slow, it's like, yeah, this guy's an Israeli. It's really easy to tell English is his second language. It is so hard to read sometimes. Sentences just fall off and end where they shouldn't. What would you call it? Like the rhythm and it doesn't feel right. It doesn't flow the same. I was reading some poetry by, oh my gosh, what's that guy's name? Oh, it's going to kill me now. Famous English poet, and I can't remember his name. Let me see if I can just pull it up real quick. I just saw it. Now I got to pull it up. It's right here. Give me 10 seconds and I'll pull it up. Let's see here. What's his name? We just talked about it. That's crazy. I'm going to find it. Don't worry. Okay, here we go. Rudyard Kipling. Yes, Kipling. Okay, so Kipling. I was just reading Kipling, and then I got into sources of power. And it's like another case where, of course, the whole curriculum is written by Israelis, or at least, these Jewish guys who are like economists, or they're at least psychologists. They want to do some work with figuring out how psychological problems can be used to solve economic or geopolitical problems. And reading Kipling, which is like poetry, it's literally like it's dripping with style and rhythm and prose, and it's written in such a way that it feels good to read it. Like it's pleasant. It's just straight up pleasant. And then you read this book, it's like, man, all right, I can tell these guys do not know English, and they have no prowess. They have no penmanship. It's just not the same. So while it's totally good, like the substance is here, it is not written well at all. It doesn't feel like I'm reading English. It's something written by an English speaker. So yeah. But yeah, I had the same experience going back to Sherlock Holmes. While after reading this, it is just, I feel voracious when I'm reading. I need to read another page. It's very hard to put the book down. But yeah, interesting that he mentioned it here. But yeah, one of Arthur Conan Doyle's stories shows how Sherlock Holmes solved a case using his ability to notice what did not happen. In Silver Blaze, the vital cue was a dog that did not bark at night. The dog usually barked when strangers came by. The fact that the murderer passed the dog in silence meant that the dog recognized him. In the recognition prime decision model, proficient decision makers are described as being able to detect patterns and typicality. They can size up a situation in a glance and realize that they have seen it or variants of it dozens or hundreds of times before. Their experience buys them the ability to recognize that a situation is a typical case. The opposite side of this coin is noticing when a pattern is broken or an expectancy is violated. In the RPD model, this triggers diagnostic efforts, including efforts to take advantage of an unexpected opportunity. The big picture or situation awareness. So this is the third aspect of an expert. Experts appear to have an overall sense of what is happening in a situation, an ability to judge prototypicality. Whereas novices may be confused by all the data elements, experts see the big picture and they appear to be less likely to fall victim to information overload. So essentially, they're able to generate a narrative from many, and I guess the more of an expert you are, the larger the data set, or the more vast the quantity of information you have at your disposal. You can create narratives and generate stories from that data set, that information. Novices are confused by it. They cannot generate a coherent story or explanation for it. Experts can tell you exactly what's going on in the grander picture, in the grander scheme, from these data points. And this is an important part. They appear to be less likely to fall victim to information overload, which would kind of suggest that they're also less likely to fall victim to propaganda. I would assume that one thing that you could kind of associate with information overload is information overload would be the case where there's too much information that's not true, or there's too much information that's irrelevant, or there's too much information that's false. And what you could say is maybe in the case of propaganda or Hasbara, as we see on Twitter a lot these days under Elon's leadership, we see a lot of Hasbara campaigns where there's half-truths or even total falsities that get spread around the world before any fact check can be made. And there's no expert. Who's going to be the expert in anti-Semitism? Who's going to be the expert that can debunk, these claims from these so-called experts? Who's going to be able to be the expert who doesn't fall victim to information overload? Who can spot the negative cue? Who can spot the what would you call it? The idiosyncrasies where there's a mismatch, there's an anomaly. So you got to be sharp. You got to have your wits about you out here. And I think that experts do, that is an extrapolation I'd be willing to go out on a limb for. Experts are less likely to fall victim to propaganda or, sensationalist propaganda campaigns. The phenomenon of situation awareness is receiving increasing attention. Ensley and Garland in press present a variety of perspectives on ways to measure situation awareness. The RPD model offers an account of situation awareness. Let me just take a drink here real quick. The RPD model presents several aspects of situation awareness that emerge once a person recognizes a situation. These are the relevant cues that need to be monitored, the plausible goals to pursue and actions to consider, and the expectancies. The discussion of problem solving in Chapter 8 suggests another aspect of situation awareness, the leverage points. When an expert describes a situation to someone else, he or she may highlight these leverage points as the central aspect of the dynamics of the situation. So they're able to see the key points, the critical leverage points that shift from one situation that I guess you could almost call them the transition points. So the critical points where something dynamic transition from one state to another. The state changes. So novices are not able to readily identify these. They don't know what caused the cause and effect relationship. They can't really identify those things. Why did it change? A novice would kind of just give you a blank stare, the fluoride stare. They'd say, I don't know. Maybe it was this, maybe it was that. They cannot identify the critical leverage points that shifted one event to another. That might even extend to the who of a situation. They might not be able to identify the key players, the power brokers, the other experts in the situation that made the decision. They can't identify that on their own. The way things work. Let me see. I just got a message from my office. Give me 1 second. Okay, we're cool. I thought maybe it was work related, but it is not. It's totally secondary. So anyways, the way things work. Experts see inside events and objects. They have mental models of how tasks are supposed to be performed. Teams are supposed to coordinate. Equipment is supposed to function. And this model lets them know what to expect and lets them notice when the expectancies are violated. Of course, the first thing that comes to mind is obviously you can think of a mechanic who hears a weird noise from a car and immediately could diagnose what's wrong. He knows what to expect at the normal sound of a car, but he also knows the malfunctioning sounds. He knows when, a belt is loose or the radiator's, I guess needs it. The radiator needs to be replaced. I'm showing my knowledge of cars right now. He knows when the rotors and the brake pads need to be replaced. They're squeaking in such a way that it's like, oh, that's definitely a bad rotor. Versus, is that a brake pad? It's all those subtleties. Hey man, your heat shield's loose. It's rattling. It's something underneath the car, so it's probably your heat shield. You either need to tear that off and get it replaced, or maybe you just want to replace your whole exhaust system. Maybe maybe the whole thing's loose. So experts know how the equipment is supposed to function, how teams are supposed to coordinate. So organizational stuff, how parts relate to each other, how people relate to each other. Since the experts have a mental model of the task, they know how the subtasks fit together and can adapt the way they perform individual subtasks to blend in with the others. So relational knowledge. They have like a graph of how things relate to each other in their mind. The mental model includes how people and places and objects relate to one another. And that's like what would you call it? A functional knowledge. That's like, could I move this part or this person into this role or this position? And would it still work, or would it work better? Or what are the downfalls of doing that? What am I going to pay? How am I going to pay for this later? This makes their performance so smooth. They don't even feel that they are performing subtasks because the integration is so strong. If they have to explain what they are doing to novices, they may have to stop and artificially break it down into subtasks. Often, they feel uncomfortable teaching the separate steps because they know they are teaching some bad habits. They are teaching the novices to do the task in a choppy way. In the short run, this task decomposition makes it easier for the novices since they do not have to worry about the big picture. They just have to remember the steps. As part of their mental model of the task, experts know various tricks of the trade along with the conditions for using them. So the cues, they know the cues for when to swap someone in or swap someone out. You could think of like a boxing coach. When someone's in the ring, they can tell, like, put your hands up. He's getting tired. Put your hands up. Whereas someone who's never boxed before wouldn't even recognize that cue at all. They would just think, man, that guy looks tired. But like, what do you do to course correct? What's the solution? How do you slot someone in? What's the technique or the strategy that you have to call into action? What are you going to yell from the sidelines to wake that person up? You can also think of like a sports coach. Uh, I'm thinking like a soccer match or football. You're thinking of you got to swap someone out. Someone looks tired. Someone's not performing today. You got to know your players. You got to know who you can swap someone out for, and what disadvantages is that gonna make? Are they gonna play the role right? Is this player gonna fill his role correctly? And what weak spots does he have? How is that going to affect the other players when you swap this person out for another? So you gotta think about the whole team, and you gotta think about how all these people relate to one another. And you probably have extensive knowledge of how they train together, how they scrimmage together if you're the coach. So knowing those knowing those subtleties, the relational differences between players and how they play with one another. The mental model of the team coordination lets the expert anticipate what the other team members will need and will be doing. Oh, dude, I didn't even read this. We're just getting better at knowing what these guys are going to say and what examples they're going to use. Think about a rookie soccer player, perhaps a striker. She may have the speed and coordination to score goals, but she often will be in the wrong place, trailing a play rather than leading it. As she gains a sense of how the game flows and how her teammates react to different situations, she can put herself in more favorable positions to score goals. Experts also have mental models of equipment. They are not just pressing buttons and receiving messages. They know enough about how their equipment works to interpret what the system is telling them. They know when their equipment may mislead them. One Navy electronic warfare technician referred to his console as a liar. He knew that it might report airplanes that were not there under certain conditions, and he had worked out strategies for double checking. He knew why these spurious signals might arise, because of the hardware and the algorithms, and he did not hold it against the equipment. In contrast, a novice would be likely to believe everything the console reported and be fooled, and then regard the equipment with distrust for being unreliable. The experts understood that the equipment is reliable and also limited in predictable ways. An industrial designer once described to me how he viewed ordinary equipment such as car doors and radios. Earlier in his career, he would feel irritation when he encountered something that was poorly designed. Eventually, he learned enough about how things were manufactured to appreciate the reasons for the poor designs. He did not excuse the designs, but had reached a point where he could look at most common appliances and devices, recognize the mechanisms inside them, and imagine how the design engineers had chosen to have the equipment constructed. So that's sort of the negative cue. That's also like sort of speculative, but that's definitely mental modeling. You're imagining the different possibilities. Why would he have done it this way and not another way? And you can formulate the other ways in your mind without even talking to the other guy, without talking to the designer of, let's say, a microwave. Why does the microwave have a handle that looks like this versus and why does it open in this direction and not the other? Why is the open button on the microwave in a different spot on this microwave than another? You have like you have infinite subtleties like that you could squabble about and try and figure out, like, why did they do this and not that? And it becomes relevant when you want to design your own microwave. And obviously, you would want to study all the other microwaves and designers who have made microwaves when you're putting together your first microwave. I know it's a stupid example, but that's like why would they do it this way? I don't know anything about microwaves. I don't think anybody here knows anything about them or why they're designed the way they are, or the subtleties of their manufacturing and the design. So that's like something that is like I'm totally clueless about. But you would the first step would be imagine, why would they do it this way and not another? And that's sort of the mental simulation. That's the process of the negative cue. Why did they do it this way versus like the negative case where all the other cases of microwaves are designed. Experts also are good at recognizing opportunities and improvisations. Chapter 8 discussed the importance of spotting leverage points. seeing opportunities and being able to make adjustments to take advantage of them. These leverage points may be visible to experts, but invisible to novices. One aspect of being able to improvise that was not discussed in Chapter 8 is the ability of experts to generate counterfactuals, explanations and predictions that are inconsistent with the data. Perhaps they have this ability because they have learned not to place too heavy a reliance on data. Novices, in contrast, have difficulty imagining a world different from the one they are seeing. That's like the what you see is what you get, and what you see is all there is kind of things in Thinking Fast and Slow. So, and also that's a system one function. Only being able to see what's in front of you and only being able to trust that versus, your speculations or some kind of expectancy. You don't have that ability to generate those simulations yet. That's the mark of a novice who's relying either on the rule book or their limited intuition. If all you can do is observe the world around you and not make any predictions, you're pretty useless, actually. That's what kind of makes you a novice. You can't make predictions or kind of make any analysis of the situation or create any counterfactuals. We recently studied weather forecasters to try to learn how they predict changes in ceiling that allow aircraft to take off and land at airports. Ceiling refers to the lowest layer of clouds on an overcast day. One observation was made on a day when the ceiling was too low for aircraft operations. One forecaster, who was not identified as having much expertise, was asked when he thought the ceiling would lift. He said his prediction was for the ceiling to lift above 1,000 feet by 2 p.m. It was then about 10 a.m. So he had 4 hours for his prediction. Probing for counterfactual thinking, we asked what sequence of events might occur that would result in the ceiling lifting earlier than that by noon. He was unable to imagine such a possibility. He had followed a set of rules to generate his prediction and could not conceive of a different world. To us, this signaled the fact that he was not an expert. We received some confirmation when we returned after lunch at 1 p.m. and learned that the ceiling had already lifted above 1,000 feet. In the RPD model, one pathway in the decision cycle is to seek additional information. This may seem like a routine activity, but it also requires expertise. So, information gathering. Experienced decision makers appear to be able to spot opportunities where the information that can be helpful can be readily obtained. For example, a weather forecaster trying to predict when a ceiling will lift may notice that the ground temperature is not rising as rapidly as usual during the morning. The critical cue here is the trend in temperature increase and the interpretation of this trend in relationship to the typical pattern of increase. Moreover, this trend can be easily tracked using one of the available displays. Skilled decision makers may be able to seek information more effectively than novices. This skill in information seeking would result in a more efficient search for data that clarify the status of the situation. The past and the future. The past and the future are part of experts' experiences. They grow out of the ability to run mental simulations. A skilled kindergarten teacher can look at a worried 5-year-old in September and anticipate how the child is going to look in June. A parent bringing a child in for the first day of school may be devastated by the way the child clings. Thoughts of disaster fill the parent's head. Is the whole year going to be like this? Will my child develop school phobia? Will my child's educational career be blighted from the very start? This type of thinking is typical of new parents and is immature in its unreasoning dread that this moment of difficulty will persist forever. In some ways, the parent's immaturity mirrors that of the child, certain that this initial feeling of panic and abandonment will be his or her own eternal fate. Only the teacher knows that by the end of the week, the same child will be bouncing out of the car and refusing to let the parent come into the classroom. The teacher has seen this hundreds of times before and can mentally simulate the way the year will progress. In aviation, there is a term to describe people who are so wrapped up in what they are doing that they are insensitive to what lies ahead. This is called flying behind the plane. It describes people who are either so novice or so overworked or have such poor situation awareness that they are not generating expectancies. They are not preparing themselves properly. Jacobs and Jacques, Jacques, whatever, I'm going to spell it out, Jaquues at the end there, in 1991, used the term time horizon. Different tasks require different time horizons, referring to the amount of look ahead needed. In driving a car at 60 miles per hour, you would be foolish to open the door and look down at the lines to make sure you are in your lane, since at that speed, your ability to make judgments is compromised by your reaction time. You would need to look ahead by many yards in order to steer a smooth course. In driving at night, you can vary your time horizon simply by adjusting your headlights. If you turn them off, you dare not go very fast. If you put on the parking lights, you can speed up a little. And if you turn on your headlights, you can travel at the speed limits. You may have difficulty if the road is poorly marked and winding. If you put on your brights, you can maintain speed on difficult roads because you have bought yourself more reaction time. Jacobs and Jacques have suggested that as people move up the organizational ladder in industry, they need to look further ahead. That kind of gives you the sensation that they're moving faster or that the situations are more dynamic as you move up the ladder. That's something to consider that I haven't thought about before. Managers may be anticipating events weeks ahead. Senior managers may be preparing for events a year or two away. The president of a large company should be seeing into the future 5 or 10 years or more. In part, this is because of the difficulty of responding at different levels in the organization. A president of a company who wants to make some change should be looking years out into the future. If he or she tried to get a change made at lower levels within a few hours, mayhem might result. In contrast, the line manager can make changes within minutes. The appropriate time horizon depends on the reaction time of the system at different levels. Experts also experience the past. As we saw, a skilled designer can look at a part and perceive how it must have been manufactured and how the decisions were made to form it one way rather than another. Skilled chess players claim that they can tell which opening in a game had been used. They even assert that they can recreate the game up to that point. People who troubleshoot system malfunctions try to imagine how the fault might create the mix of observed symptoms. That's my job every day. Monday through Friday, I am trying to diagnose and troubleshoot systems and their malfunctions. And all I'm doing is imagining what could have created the situation, what led up to this. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. Experts perceive a situation as the patterns and relationships that grew out of the past and will grow into the future, not just the cues that exist at the moment. All these are perceived at the same time. All are part of their situation awareness. The ability to see the past and the future rests on an understanding of the primary causes in a domain and the ability to apply these causes to run mental simulations. I'm just going to wait for this motorcycle to go by. This is one way to distinguish true experts from people who pretend to be experts. The pretenders have mastered many procedures and tricks of the trade. Their actions are smooth. They show many of the characteristics of expertise. However, if they are pushed outside the standard patterns, they cannot improvise. They lack a sense of the dynamics of the situation. They have trouble explaining how the current state of affairs came about and how it will play out. They also have trouble mentally simulating how a different future state from the one they predicted might evolve. Another aspect of mental simulation is to be able to decenter, to see the world through the eyes of others. This has been especially apparent in our study of tank platoon leaders, who needed to anticipate their adversaries. Just see here, make sure everything's good. Okay, cool. Both trainee tank platoon leaders and the instructors noticed the same cues. However, the instructors were also considering cues that were not present. For example, they imagined how the adversary was approaching from the other side of the hill, what the adversary was seeing, and where the adversary was going to look for signs of an opposing force. The new trainees, when asked to form a defensive position, spread out the prescribed number of meters and took cover at the places that felt right to them. The instructors immediately noticed all kinds of flaws in their defenses. The trainees had never been in the position of storming a position such as the one they were trying to create. They didn't have any way of viewing it from the other eyes. This despite the fact that the trainees were all officers and college graduates, and some were from West Point. The instructors were enlisted men, none with college degrees. This was not a matter of intelligence. Actually, it was a matter of experience. Fine discriminations. Experts can detect differences that novices cannot see, cannot even force themselves to see. So, in other words, perceive. Wine tasters can tell one type of grape from another, and even one year of wine from another. To novices, wines are generic. They all taste the same. If you are just starting to drink wines, no matter how much attention you pay, how much you swirl the fluid around in your mouth, you don't get it. That's because it is not a fact. It's not a fact or an insight. You cannot learn just by being told or learn it all of a sudden. It takes lots of experience and lots of variety in that experience to notice differences. Alan Lesgold, and that's Lesgold, at the University of Pittsburgh, studied the way radiologists interpret X-rays and found a clear difference in what an experienced radiologist notices versus what a new student finds. Some physicians have tried to explore the limits of a radiologist's ability to make discriminations. Several years ago, the organizers of a radiology conference held a contest to see who could do the best job at interpreting difficult X-rays. For fun, they slipped in a slide that had a double exposure of two different lungs superimposed on each other. The champions were not deterred. They were able to detect that the slide had been doctored and even hypothesized that it was a double exposure. Managing our own limitations. There is another direction that experts can see, and that is inward. They can see inside their own thought processes, the process of metacognition, which means thinking about thinking. That was the whole, that book that we just read, Thinking Fast and Slow, that was all metacognition. That was all thinking about thinking. I definitely recommend reading that book if you're interested in that topic, if you're interested in at all in metacognition and identifying the flaws in our thinking and the negative cues and the patterns of thought that we have and why we think certain ways and how we can avoid those pitfalls, like the blind spots of our metacognition. Of our cognition. Okay, let's see here. An experienced student taking a time-pressured exam might come across a complex mathematics problem and judge that it will take a long time to figure out. Perhaps it is an area that the student had not given much preparation, or maybe that the student knows he or she is likely to get confused in the equations, or some other reason. If the student decides to skim the question in order to work on it subconsciously, but to move on to other problems to finish more of the test before coming back, that is an example of metacognition. 4 components of metacognition seem most important: memory limitations, having the big picture, self-critiques, and strategy selection. Experts are often sensitive to their own memory limitations, including their working memory for holding something like a telephone number and their long-term memory for anticipating that they will not be able to recall where they hid that birthday present several months into the future. As a result, They can adopt subtle procedures to avoid the difficulty. They can also factor in their level of alertness, their ability to sustain concentration, and so forth. Experts are not only better at forming situation awareness and seeing the big picture, but they can detect when they are starting to lose the big picture. Rather than waiting until they have become hopelessly confused, experts sense any slippage early and make the necessary adaptations. Experts can critique themselves. Since their performance is less variable than that of novices, they can more easily notice when they do a poor job, and they can usually figure out why in order to make corrections. Experts also seem more likely to critique their judgments and their plans, since they can use their experience to see where the judgments might be wrong and their plans weak. Using these abilities, experts can think about their own thinking to change their strategies. Regardless of whether they want to avoid memory limitations, loss of the big picture, continued performance degradation, or poor judgments and plans, experts try to find more robust strategies. These can be decision strategies, strategies for where they should focus their attention, or strategies for reducing workload. They can include strategies for practicing to overcome some of the limitations. For some obvious reasons, novices have difficulty in situations requiring metacognition. Everyone needs some experience with a task before they can anticipate where they will run into trouble. They need to have some experience with different strategies for handling a task in order to learn about their own abilities, both strengths and weaknesses, so they can take those into account. There are many other characteristics of expertise besides the ones already noted that present the features of expertise most linked to naturalistic decision-making. Included here are factors such as how experts can more smoothly carry out a sequence of actions and how experts integrate their reactions. As novices learn tasks well enough and those tasks become more automated, they gain the freedom to look ahead. You see this in new drivers. At first, they worry about whether they will reliably hit the gas and brake pedals. They don't dare go very fast. They are also not paying much attention to the road. As they become comfortable with their ability to manage all the tasks of driving, such as hitting the right pedals quickly and turning the steering wheel accurately, they can start to look further ahead and then speed up. Another performance change is that the individual acts and judgments become integrated into overall strategies. Instead of doing 2 or 3 separate movements, they all become part of the same movement. A good example is the behavior of a 16-month-old trying to throw a ball. Standing up is still not natural to the child, and throwing a ball while sitting is difficult. Doing the two at the same time is virtually impossible for many children of this age. A few years later, the two actions have been integrated into one. The concepts of expertise can be linked to each other using an example of cooking a meal. Example 10.2, recipe for disaster. Damn, so I was already hungry. I can smell all the restaurants around here starting, they're cooking up everything around 8 and 9 o'clock here. And now we're reading about recipes. Man, I'm getting hungry. All right, let's read this example. I am going to have to cook a special dish for some guests, and I don't know what to make. A friend offers me a recipe for an outstanding dish. It is important to impress my guests, but it is also important not to fail as a cook. Should I make the dish? The answer depends on my expertise. I have little experience in cooking. I'm not even such a hot shopper. My family still recalls the time I was sent to the supermarket to buy a head of lettuce and returned with a cabbage. For someone like me, it would be a mistake to use the recipe. A recipe, we all know, is a set of procedures. It includes a list of ingredients and a list of operations to perform on these ingredients. None of this is as simple as it seems. Let's say I have decided to use the recipe. I start cooking away a few hours before the guests arrive. The recipe calls for a red pepper, and I don't have one. Can I use a green pepper as a substitute? The recipe calls for raisins. I don't have raisins. Can I use grapes and add sugar? The recipe calls for potatoes. I dig out two and notice they look small. Should I add another one or two? In short, how do I improvise? How do I know the size of a typical potato? I am in trouble even before I have started cooking. I realize I need to prepare side dishes, so I look in the refrigerator to see what there is. I must ignore the issue of how the dishes will taste together, since I do not have the experience to imagine how my recipe will taste. I can stare at its ingredients and directions and not be able to anticipate its final flavor. I look at an ingredient like flour and wonder what taste the flour is going to add. An experienced cook would know that the flour is in there to thicken the dish, and by adding too much flour, I have just made sure it was going to congeal. The experienced cook could imagine how the originators tried it without flour and decided to thicken it. I just see the word flour. Now, I am cooking the dish, grating the potatoes. But the work is taking too long, and the potatoes are turning an unappetizing brown. I was supposed to add these potatoes 15 minutes ago, but it's hard to grate such small potatoes. My fingers are getting tired. I lack the metacognitive skills to take into account the time it takes for me to perform the operations. Should I turn the heat down under the pan while I am finishing the potatoes, or will that spoil some chemical process? Speaking of finishing, what is the dish supposed to look like when it's finished? I've never made it before, so I can't tell. The recipe says to bake it at 350 degrees for 1 hour, or until brown on top. I don't know what to make of brown on top, so I better stick to the 1 hour. Is my oven calibrated accurately? It already looks done on top, but will it still be mushy inside? Even worse, my guests won't arrive for another 20 minutes. If I turn off the oven now, will it get too cold? Should I leave the heat on low, or will that dry the dish out? An experienced cook would notice that the dish wasn't bubbling around the edges, so it wasn't done. The reason it was getting dark so quickly was that I had left the rack too close to the heating coil. I don't see the missing event, the failure to achieve bubbling. The point of that exercise was to show how much perceptual experience is needed to carry out tasks that may seem simple because they can be reduced to rules and procedures. We are often fooled into thinking that the procedures are going to be carried out easily. In fact, procedures often take much expertise to interpret. Rules tell you that when a certain condition occurs, initiate a certain action. The trick is knowing when the first condition has occurred. The recipe can state, when it is brown on top, take it out of the oven, but brown on top is not so obvious. Brown on top stretches from just starting to change color to all the way to beginning to smoke. Expertise and decision making. How good are skilled decision makers under conditions such as time pressure? This section describes 2 experiments that we did to show the effect of expertise. Both used chess as the domain to study because expertise is nicely scaled by the United States Chess Federation. Based on their performance in tournaments, chess players are given point ratings that are calibrated so that a player whose strength is 200 points higher than another should beat that other player 75% of the time. Chess players are rated as international grandmasters, above 2,500 points, masters, 2,200 to 2,500 points, experts, 2,000 to 2,200, Class A players, above 1,800, Class B above 1,600, Class C above 1,400, and Class D, players below 1,400 points. The best players, like Bobby Fischer and Garry Kasparov and Judith Polgar, are all grandmasters. Most medium-sized American cities are lucky to have a player at the level of master. Roberta Calderwood, Beth Crandall, and I, Calderwood, Klein, and Crandall, examined how good chess players are under extreme time pressure. This study was sponsored by the Air Force Office of Scientific Research and the Army Research Institute. After all, many natural settings place severe time restrictions on decision makers. We developed the RPD model to explain how skilled decision makers cope with time pressure. Still, our field studies never showed whether the fireground commanders were making good decisions. Perhaps skilled decision makers fall apart under time pressure. In the sequence of our studies, the chess experiment was one of our earlier projects. To find out what time pressure did to skilled players, we studied the quality of the moves that chess players made under regulation time and under blitz conditions. Regulation conditions require 40 moves in a 90-minute period, or about 2 minutes 15 seconds per move. Under blitz conditions, each player sets his or her chess clock for 5 minutes, and then the action starts. Your clock runs from the time your opponent moves his or her timer button until you complete your move, and then you hit your button. If your flag drops or if you are checkmated, you lose. We estimated that in the blitz games, the players had an average of 6 seconds per move. Even if they did some thinking while it was their opponent's turn, they still did not have much time. To gather our data, we arranged for 3 masters and 3 Class B players to play games. One tournament for the masters and another for the Class B players, so strengths would be equal. Each tournament was really 2 tournaments, one for regulation time and one for blitz time. Each pair of players engaged in 4 games, taking the white pieces which go first in one game and the black pieces in the other for both regulation and blitz. We offered cash prizes for the winners of the tournaments, along with payments for serving in the experiment. In addition, the results counted toward the players' ratings, and that was probably more incentive for them to do well than the money. We chose masters and Class B players to ensure a fairly large difference in strengths. The grandmasters who were consulting with us prefer not to rate the moves of weak players. Someone can make a brilliant move, and the grandmaster is not sure if the player sees the implications. We did not bother to rate the moves at the beginning of the games, since openings are fairly ritualized and would not reveal much about improvisational decision-making. We concentrated on the tough moves, the points where the real choices were made, as identified by the grandmasters, rather than the obvious moves where there is a forced sequence that anyone could see. The experts rated each of these decision points on a 5-point scale, where 5 is outstanding and 1 is a blunder. Figure 10.1 shows the results. The most important finding in the figure is how high the quality of moves was, even under blitz conditions. The time pressure did not slow the masters down. 6 seconds a move, one after another, facing a strong opponent, and the move quality hardly changed at all. When we talk about the importance of experience for naturalistic decision-making, this is what we mean. There is no time to generate lots of options and compare them. There is barely enough time to pick up the piece, move it, release it, and hit the clock. That the 2 groups did about the same under regulation time suggests that either our sample was too small or our rating scale was not sufficiently sensitive. But under the blitz conditions, the masters held their own, whereas the Class B players dropped sharply. This shift was statistically significant. Next, we looked at the proportion of moves rated as blunders, a rating of 1 or 2. Only a few moves fell into this category, but we did find a difference between masters and Class B players. Remarkably, the masters kept the ratio of blunders constant around 7 to 8%, even under the blitz conditions. The Class B players became ragged. For the regulation games, their rate of blunders was 11%. Under time pressure, this rate increased to 25%, a statistically significant finding and a satisfying one to us. The Class B players could not match the masters' steady play under time pressure. Still, the Class B players made 75% of their time-pressured decisions without blundering. This first experiment was successful in showing that skilled decision-makers can perform at very high levels despite time pressure. The second chess experiment, Klein, Wolf, Militello and Zambach. And the only name I haven't read before is Militello, Militello. In 1995, examined a more detailed question designed to test the RPD model itself. The model claims that skilled decision makers can generate feasible courses of action as the first ones they consider, so there is no need to generate lots of options. Can skilled decision makers do this? If not, then the rationale for the RPD model disappears. The design of the experiment was simple. We presented some mid-game positions to players and asked them to think aloud while they studied each one, up to the point where they had selected a move. We asked them to tell us everything they were thinking about, every move they considered, even the poor ones, and especially the first move they considered. Using the services of a chess master in Southern Ohio, we had selected 4 board positions from mid-game or early endgame positions. We used 16 chess players, 8 strong ones, ratings that look between Class A and Masters, and 8 weaker ones, ratings of Class D to Class maybe B. So it just looks like Masters and beginners, I'll say. It kind of plots around there. Each player worked alone. After each one had finished all 4 boards, we asked him to give his rating for each of the legal moves available in each position. We wanted to understand which moves the players themselves thought were good ones and poor ones. The results are shown in figure 10.3. According to the players' ratings, there were a great many poor moves that were legally permissible, and only a small number of good ones. If the players were drawing randomly from the set of legal moves, their ratings for the first moves they thought of should show the same shape. The curve for the actual first moves considered is just the reverse. The players awarded high marks to the first moves they considered. They were playable and in many cases received the highest ratings. The results are statistically significant. When we examined the strong and the weaker players separately, even the weaker players gave high ratings to their first moves. The data in figure 10.3 are based on subjective ratings. Maybe the players were thinking they generated good moves, but really generated poor moves. We needed an objective measure of the move quality. We had selected the board positions from games that had been objectively rated by a panel of grandmasters, who awarded points to the different moves. The best move got 10 points. A move that was not so good might get 8 points, or 5 points. Perhaps a few were worth 2 or 3 points, and the rest of the moves were not awarded any points at all. We had planned the experiment this way because we wanted an independent measure of move quality. To analyze the results, we were not interested in how many points a move received. A move that received any points at all was a plausible one. Any move that got no points was not worth considering. All we had to do was tally how often a first move got any points. These results are shown in figure 10.4. For all 124 legal moves, only 20 had been given points by the panel of grandmasters. So of all the legal moves, which were 124, the grandmasters only awarded points to 20. Or so basically 1 in 6 were awarded any points at all for being, worthy of note, being noteworthy at all. So all the first moves, which there were 64 of them, the grandmaster gave points to 41 of them. So just because it's a legal move does not mean that it's a noteworthy move. If the players in the experiment had been sampling randomly from the possible legal moves, they would have shown the same ratio. About 1/6 of their first moves would have received points. The actual ratio was 4 out of 6. Most of the moves they considered had received points from the grandmasters, and again the results were statistically significant. And again, the weaker players still showed the effect, almost as strongly as the better players. Even weaker players generated reasonable options as the first ones they had thought of. So this is that theory that people do make good first decisions. Your gut instinct is usually at least directionally correct. You can be sure that your intuition is not guiding you astray. Generally, that's like a general rule of thumb. The data confirmed the prediction made by the RPD model. Skilled decision makers generate feasible options as the first ones they think of. Therefore, there is little to be gained by generating and then evaluating lots of options. In chess, it is important to find the best move, not just a good one. So players do continue to search for the best options. Yet, we also found that for the most part, they settled on the first option they had thought of, even after considering some others. There are two made. Yeah, sorry, truck going by. I'll just wait. There are two major objections to this experiment. The first is that our findings are obvious. How is that an objection? You could make a study that like proves gravity, and everyone would be like, "Yeah, that's so obvious," but like it's useful, I guess. Like, why would that be an objection? That's so weird. Everyone knows people can generate reasonable options as the first they consider. The second objection is that players may have thought of really bad moves that they never told us. Maybe that maybe they were thinking of all the options randomly at some subconscious level and filtering them out before they got to the level of consciousness. If this was true, we had not proved anything. And of course, yeah, you could make the case that, well, of course, they're going to filter out the bad options subconsciously, and then they won't even be able to tell you. They won't. It's a self-reported study. It's like, of course, they won't be able to tell you exactly what they're thinking. But I would say that because your first instinct is usually governed by your intuition, and you don't have time to think about it, I would say it would be hard to deceive yourself with a constructed explanation. So they would literally have to be, yeah, I guess they're right. It would have to be a totally subconscious decision, but I don't think that's the case. I think you are able to interrogate your decision making process. That's the metacognition. You're able to step in with system 2 thinking and interrogate system 1 and say, like, why did you choose that? Or at least, maybe not in the time of doing it, but maybe later as like a postmortem. Okay, so anyways, these objections contradict each other. One or the other, but not both, can be held. If you feel we have not really confirmed our hypothesis, and it still makes sense to believe that people generate large sets of options without being aware of it, then our findings are not obvious at all. The first objection is that our findings are obvious. They are not obvious to professional trainers who teach problem-solving skills by insisting that people generate large sets of options to do a good job. Perhaps this advice is useful under some conditions, such as very low experience levels. Yet, if our results were so obvious, the instructors in these courses would not be presenting their seminars. The second objection is that people might still be generating the full set of options at a subconscious level. I'm losing my voice here. I've been going for an hour and a half. Let me get some water real quick. The second objection is that people might still be generating the full set of options at a subconscious level. I agree that the think aloud method we used is subjective, and this could affect our findings. But what is this objection claiming? That people subconsciously generate a full set of options at each point? Consider what happens if you take this seriously. What is a full set of options? It is all the legal moves plus the illegal ones, plus non-moves. For example, you move your queen up a square and I throw my glass of water in your face or call you an unpleasant name. The number of different actions available to me is infinite. If I have to generate all of them subconsciously each time I come to a choice point, then I will not have time to make any decisions. So we cannot take seriously the idea that we start with all of the options and filter down to the final winner. There has to be some sort of mechanism for generating only reasonable options. And this is something that I posted earlier. the Jordan Peterson lecture about perception. Your goals define your perception. I can't stress this enough. Your perception is in part defined by your goals, but your goals also define your perception. So it's this feedback loop. It's this vicious cycle. It's this thing that bootstraps basically how we think and perceive about and perceive the world. You can just watch him talk about it. This was before he became like totally ideologically possessed. Obviously, he was still a liberal back then. I'm not making any claims to his sensibilities, but he had not sold his soul to Israel yet. So I still claim that those lectures were valid, and I do think that they were completely academic. They were actually very good. So the maps of meaning lectures about metacognition and how we perceive things, that was very good. I put the clip in there. Let me put it in the Jumbotron, actually. I forgot that I'm running the space, and I can just do that. Give me 1 second. Jumbo. Let's see. Come on, man. Okay, here we go. Sharing to the Jumbotron. Yeah, I actually think that that's a very good video. It's a clip of a longer one. It's like 2.5 hours. So if you want to watch the full thing, you can go do that. But yes, we do not start with all possible options and filter them out. That is not something that we do subconsciously or consciously. That is not possible. Even computers spend a very long time doing that, and they can compute billions of integer operations per second, let's just say. So that's just not something we do. That's not something even computers do like reasonably fast. An infinite set of options, an infinite set of actions that can be taken in response to a stimuli, that's just not possible. These two experiments show that experience does shape decision-making. Experienced people have an impressive ability to withstand time pressure and generate plausible options so that they do not have to waste effort and attention by comparing lots of options. Rather than trying to wipe experience out of the studies because it can bias the results, we can try to design studies to understand its many aspects. Yeah, name one study that you can think of that takes into account the experience of the subject. Virtually none of them, virtually zero. It's like left out of the room. It's considered subjective, and it's considered not part of the process of science. So now one place that it is, ironically, the thing that people called pseudoscience, the one place that it is taken into account is like this intersectional politics stuff, like the identity politics. It's all about experience. It's all about the personal experience, the subjective, what a person feels at any given moment. That's how you get like transsexuality. That's how you get these like weird things that are totally subjective and don't have any grounding in reality. It's all the subjective. It's like purely subjective. So I think there has to be some counterbalance. There has to be like a weight between the two. There needs to be a Hegelian dialect. There needs to be a synthesis between the two of the subjective and the objective. Okay, there needs to be a synthesis between the experiential. I don't know how to say that word. Experiential world, I guess, is how you'd say it, and the objective measured world. So that I think is what the Bayesian analysis is. The Bayesian, what do they call that? Yeah, Bayesian analysis. That's literally what that is. So I recommend at all points in time, if you're not sure of your intuition or you're not sure of your measurements, weigh it against each other with your experience, or weigh it against with your measurements, with your tools. If you feel like your car is going much faster than your speedometer reads, maybe you should slow down. Maybe you should slow down and maybe pull out your phone and get your GPS out and see if it's going the speed that you think it is. If your tape measure, if you think here we go. If you think your stud finder isn't working, maybe you should just like maybe you should just tear a hole in your wall and figure out if the stud's actually there. No, not actually. I'm just kidding. But applications. Let's get to the applications of all this. The chapter is still going. We have to get through the applications and key points. Application. The most important application is to train people to achieve expertise more quickly. The perspective we use to understand expertise will govern the approach. The most typical perspective is that experts know more. They have more facts and rules at their disposal. In this chapter, I have taken a different perspective. Expertise is learning how to perceive. Damn, dude, before I even read this, I nailed that. I nailed literally the application all the way at the end of the chapter. I nailed it from the beginning. Go watch that video if you haven't already. The knowledge and rules are incidental. To date, the field of technical training has been dominated by efforts to teach rules, facts, and procedures. Technical training had been unexamined and unstructured throughout the 1960s, and many technical training programs from those years were poorly organized and conducted. In the 1960s and 1970s in the United States, there was a great interest in the systematic approaches to training. These methods treated the skills and knowledge to be imparted during training as a set of procedures and rules that could be decomposed and systematically taught. This strategy makes sense for simple procedural tasks, especially in high turnover jobs with minimally educated workers. Wow. So one thing that I always hear from fucking idiots, man, from fucking idiots, is that we should go back to the 1950s. We should go back to the 1940s. That was the high peak of civilization. We've never had it better. America was greatest in the 1940s. Blah, 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 blah. World War II should have never happened. We'd be living in blah, blah, blah. You know, that kind of stuff. The wish casting of like the past was always better than the future, blah blah blah. He's telling you right here that our cognition, our analysis of cognition was limited and insufficient, and it didn't work, except in a few cases. And he tells you, especially in cases of high turnover jobs with minimally educated workers. So outside of that, our training, our ability to train people and create experts was virtually non-existent. We could create factory workers. We could create people who worked in factories who weren't highly educated. But how did you make an expert? You couldn't. You couldn't even analyze what an expert was. And that was only, what do you want to call it? Maybe 80 years ago. This is the time that everyone says was like the golden age. We were going to go to the moon and beyond. We were going to, colonize the space and blah, blah, blah. We're going to rule the galaxy. Not in the 1940s, not with what we knew. We know more now. We actually live in a timeline where we've learned more about human psychology. We've learned more about cognition. We have more tools at our disposal. We can actually achieve more than our ancestors could have ever dreamed. Yeah, sure. The world sucks right now. Yeah, like politics sucks. Yeah, the West broadly, and I'm using that. I have a self-awareness when I'm using the term the West. Yeah, it has declined. Yeah, we're not in charge of our own governments. Yeah, we're not in charge of our nation, and we don't have nationalists in charge. And yeah, there's a lot of things wrong with the economy and our geopolitical relationships with other countries. Yeah, there's a lot of shit wrong, but we are more effective, and we have more to learn from the future, and we can look forward to creating a better future than our ancestors ever could have. We have more potential. We have more tools at our disposal. We know more than the sum of our ancestors. The things we know now would blow their minds. And yeah, we can opine about the past, and yeah, we can have this rose-tinted view of the ancient past that's now 80 years behind us. But maybe we can look forward, and we can take these things to heart, and maybe we can use them to create the better future that we're complaining about that we don't have. If we can look back and say, wow, gee, it was better back then, and we can see the good parts, maybe we can use these metacognition tools these cognitive tools to create a better future and bring the good parts back and leave the bad parts behind. We don't have to bring it all back. We don't have to, step back into the past. We don't have to revert things, and we don't have to discard everything we've learned. We know more now. We are superior to our ancestors. And that's not to say that we did it on our own. We've had experts. We've had geniuses who've revealed these things to us. And, sometimes the wrong people are using them against us. And yeah, maybe it's not all sunshine and roses, and maybe that's going to take a lot of hard work, but maybe that's worth fighting for. Maybe that's like the future that we can create. Maybe that's our purpose. Maybe instead of complaining about how good things were and how bad things are, maybe you can just go out there and make them better. But anyways, it just gets me so riled up when I hear people talk about how the 1940s and 1950s were like the golden age. Fuck you. Fuck you. You're living in the greatest era humans have ever lived in. We know more, and we have more tools at our disposal and in our disposal than any humans in history. And you want to complain about it? Fuck you. These are the sources of power. This is how you make change in the world. This is how you become a player. This is how you become a cognitive leader. This is how you rise above the rest and you make yourself useful to the nationalists, to the people who are putting America first. People want to talk about how, gun control is stupid because it's not the guns that are doing the crime, it's the people. Well, then when are you going to take responsibility for your own actions and, take control of your own life and say, you know what, I have the tools at my disposal. I can make life worth living. I can make a country that I want to live in. When are you going to stand up for what you fucking believe? So sick of that. The 1940s, the 1950s, fuck you. Kill yourself. You're a waste of time. You're a waste of breath. Get out of the way. We're shaping the future, okay? You can just get left behind. You can get left behind in what's going to be the 1940s to us. So fuck you. This strategy makes sense for simple procedural tasks, especially in high turnover jobs with minimally educated workers. The strategy for efficient instructional programs. Systems approaches to training were an improvement over anarchy. Nonetheless, they were not designed to teach people to gain higher levels of expertise or to make better judgments and decisions. Hubert Dreyfus and Stuart Dreyfus in 1986, and I think that's the famous Dreyfus, Dreyfus. The Dreyfus brothers have described how people move from the level of novices to experts. They claim that novices follow rules, whereas the experts do not. We would be mistaken to think that the experts had learned the rules so well that they did not have to refer to them. Hubert Dreyfus uses the example of learning to ride a bicycle by using training wheels. As adults, we do not believe we learned to use those training wheels so well that they became an ingrained part of our bicycle riding perspective. We outgrew the need for training wheels. We developed a sense of bicycle dynamics. And also, that's something that I learned about cognition is there are things that you can embody. There's like embodied knowledge. There's knowledge that, and people call this muscle memory, but there's like embodied knowledge that you cannot articulate. You could not teach someone how to ride a bike. You could not write a set of instructions to do that. You can only tell them you need to get on the bike and try and ride it. You need to pedal fast. You need to keep the handlebars straight and don't, like when you wobble, when you turn left, make sure you turn right to correct your course. There's only so many things you can teach someone, but you cannot teach them the experience of riding a bike. And you can't teach them to do it right the first time. That just doesn't happen. People usually have to fall over a few times or crash the bike or, ride it slow first and then ride it fast. They're never riding like an expert at the beginning. You can never teach someone to do something like an expert from the beginning. That's embodied knowledge. That's what experience, the only thing that experience can give us. And so that embodied knowledge is what an expert has. And yeah, maybe you learn the rules of bicycle dynamics, but you learn the laws of physics or whatever. Maybe you can write all the equations of riding a bicycle, the tire pressure and against the road and the friction and blah, blah, blah. The pendulum motion. I don't care. You can write all that down, but you still couldn't teach someone how to ride a bike. So yeah, the bicycle riding perspective, the experience, the dynamics of riding a bicycle, it's words, it escapes words, it escapes articulation. You cannot transmit that knowledge yet. And that's why the Matrix was so profound when they have the guy sitting in the chair and he puts on the helmet and he downloads all the information needed to like be an expert in karate or martial arts or whatever the hell it was. It was like that's like a science fiction thing. That's because we don't have that yet. We don't have the ability to articulate it, let alone download it. So that's something that we still have no way to do that. That's like still science fiction. So if any geniuses out there, maybe they can figure out how to do that. Maybe they can figure out how to articulate it or figure out, because the first step is probably to articulate it, and then the next step would be to, you know, have computers articulate it to us. And then the third step would be transmitting that to our brains, like writing that to our brains. So like we're not even at step one. So there's a lot to go. I'm white pilled. There's a lot of things that we still have to learn as humans. There's a lot of room to grow. There's a lot of things we haven't learned. So we can still explore. It's just cognitive now. Instead of outwards and over land and over sea, using boats and guns to conquer new lands, it's totally cognitive. You got to outsmart your peers. You got to know more. You got to think more. I always think of that cartoon where it's like, where do you work out at? The library? It's like, yeah, that's like the cognitive domain. That's like the gym, but for the future. That's where people are going to be thinking, and then that's the only way to get ahead in today's society, is to think smarter, to outwit your opponents and your competitors, to become an expert in thinking. Presenting the procedures to trainees gives them a false sense of progress. The confidence dissipates when novices realize that applying the procedures depends on context, and that no one can tell them what context is. Judgment and decision tasks in natural settings are rarely straightforward. If we want people to think like experts, we have to be able to understand how the experts are thinking. We have to clarify their strategies and their ways of perceiving the situation. We have to elaborate on each aspect of expertise so that expertise becomes the guidepost for the training. Yeah, that's so important. Deciding what the goal is like, yeah, you want them to do the job right, but preferably you'd want them to become an expert. Yeah, you want to train someone to like do the job correctly at a warehouse. They might be packaging something, or they might be, you know, inspecting something. You would want them to be good at the job, but what if you wanted them to be good at any job in the warehouse? Well, wouldn't you want them to be an expert? Wouldn't that take an expert? So like, yeah, that should be the goal. If it's like the meta game, it's like if you were good at any part of the game, you would be good at the whole game. You could be put anywhere. You could be, think of like a soccer game. You could be a striker, you could be a defender. It doesn't matter. You're good at the whole game. You could be the goalie. But you could still score goals, and it wouldn't matter. You could be put anywhere. You could be the coach. It doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't fucking matter. So that's the goal of becoming an expert. It's like you're versatile. You can, the goal is so abstract and so lofty that it encompasses the entire game. It encompasses all of the tasks that are part of this job or the situation or this whatever. The thing you're being trained on. So anyways, yeah, I'm getting a little hungry, so my train of thought is wavering a little bit. I'm having trouble keeping focus, but we're going to keep going. We have to clarify their strategies and their ways of perceiving the situation. We have to elaborate on each aspect of expertise so that the expertise becomes the guidepost for the training. In Chapter 7, I discussed a project for the U.S. Marine Corps to help squad leaders learn like experts, rather than trying to teach them to think like experts. In that setting, we did not have the conditions for identifying critical cues, patterns, and so forth. In other settings, however, it is possible to do the knowledge elicitation to find out how skilled decision makers think, and to make some of these findings available to the trainees. Methods of cognitive task analysis have been developed for this purpose. Excuse me. Cognitive task analysis is the description of the expertise needed to perform complex tasks. The steps of cognitive task analysis are to locate sources of expertise and acquire background knowledge in the process. Evaluate the quality of the expertise, perform knowledge elicitation to get inside the head of the skilled decision makers, process the findings so they can be interpreted to others, and apply those findings. Traditional task analyses have concentrated on the procedures to be followed and have had relatively little to say about perception, judgment, and decision-making skills. As we move to more complex jobs, especially as information technologies place more demands on workers and their superiors, we have to go beyond the traditional task analyses. So it's not about the steps. It's not about performing some rote memorization and then executing on those tasks. It's about the context. It's about the situation. It's about the perception and your judgment of those things. It's about the goals. It's about how you react to the changing situation and improvising. It's about how you simulate mentally what's going to happen next. In organizations, much of the knowledge is held within the heads of the workers and is never shared. This is tacit knowledge. In most organizations, the culture seems, and let me highlight that actually, because I want to come back to this. Fuck you. Blah, 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 blah. Sorry, I'm just using my Kindle like a boomer. Undo. Okay, here we go. Bruh. Where am I going? Okay, here we go. In organizations, dude. Are you kidding me, man? Why is this so hard? When I'm not streaming, I can do this so easily, but when I'm streaming, this is like an impossible task. Bruh. I cannot even get it to highlight this text. I'm gonna fucking freak out. Here we go. Okay, we're back. That's so embarrassing. It only happens when I'm live. Whatever. Okay. This is tacit knowledge. The knowledge that is held within the heads of the workers that is never shared. In most organizations, the culture seems to ignore the expertise that already exists, to take it for granted. If a skilled worker retired after 30 years on the job and tried to leave with a favorite personal computer, some programs, or a set of tools, he or she would be stopped. The organization knows the value of the equipment, but the organization lets the worker walk out with all of that expertise, which is worth far more than some minor equipment, and never says a word, never even notices the loss. This is what happened in the 90s. This is what happens when you outsource and ship all of your jobs overseas. You lose the tacit knowledge. You don't know how to make anything anymore. You don't know how things relate to one another. You forget all the little intricacies, all the little details, all the experience, all the context. You lose all of your decision-making skills. We forget how to make things. Reshoring is not just, bringing the factory back. It's about training workers. If all you have is unskilled labor, if all you have is a service industry, how are you going to teach people to make chips, to make computer chips that are 3 micrometers in width? Some of the logic gates, some of the circuits. It's insane. How are you going to teach anyone to do that? How are you going to teach them to operate a forklift, let alone do that? We have logistical problems, like how do you get something from off a ship into a port, onto a truck, to a warehouse center in the middle of the country, into a store so it can be sold? How do you do that? And in a limited amount of time before the product goes bad? How do you solve any of these problems if you don't have logistics managers and you don't have warehouses and you shipped all of that overseas? The only thing we have is like warehouses. The only thing we have is like giant warehouses full of shit from China that gets shipped around in the country. The only thing we have is like Walmarts. We have Walmarts and we have Walgreens. So what do you do? What do you do when the only thing we have is a restaurant industry? We've lost all of our tacit knowledge. Like he said, that we would like freak out. It would be a national news story if someone stole a laptop. Do you remember on January 6th when someone was like using Nancy Pelosi's laptop or something, or stole her. I forget what happened with it. Do you remember how much they freaked out over that? But like the tacit knowledge from all of our companies being shipped overseas for years because McKinsey and Associates told everybody that they could make a quick dollar. No one blinked an eye at that. They said that was actually good for the country. It's so backwards. Nationalism is the only thing that can fix that. Nationalism is the only thing that can say that the ought is more important than the is. That we ought to, do something a certain way rather than we should be rich. We should have money. We could get so rich. Trump's talking about it right now. It's like, we're going to bring back our factories. We're going to bring back our manufacturing, and we're going to put it in Mexico. Mexico is going to be making all our cars. I don't give a fuck if Mexico makes all our cars. That's just as bad as China making our cars. We need to be putting that shit in our country. We need to be putting Americans back to work so they can inhabit the knowledge, so that they can embody all of the tacit knowledge that is actually important. We need a workforce that is trained and highly skilled and intelligent. We need there's so many things we need besides the stupid factories. And no one wants to talk about that. We want to talk about Chinese nationals stealing like IP theft, really? No one gives a fuck about IP theft. It happens every day, all the time by Israelis. It happens all the time by Chinese people. Indians come here by the boatload. There's jumbo jets full of them coming over right now with all their extended family members to steal our secrets and to go take a job that an ordinary American could be working. And they're going to do a poor job, and they're going to send all the remittance overseas. It's terrible. And they're going to do that, and they're not going to blink an eye. The C-suite executives are going to laugh it all the way to the bank. They're just going to buy a bigger yacht. They're going to get a higher gate for their gated community. They're going to get more security. They're going to, get nicer clothes. They're going to buy finer silks. And we're going to be over here talking about, oh, well, IP theft is bad. Get these people out of here. Get Americans working, man. What are we doing? It's the tacit knowledge. It's the embodied knowledge that we should be caring about. That's what Hamilton was talking about. He was talking about a distinguished, educated, and healthy and prosperous workforce. He was not talking about, importing Indians to do the works, to do the work for us. We can build machines to do it for us. We don't need Indians. Machines can be our embodied knowledge. We can know how to build a machine that does the job for us. We don't have to have some Indian who's going to leave anyways, who's going to send all the money overseas. Come on, man. Can we think 5 steps ahead? Can we think, 20 years ahead instead of just thinking about the next month, the next quarter? Yet, in an organization, knowledge is a resource and should be treated as such. We can draw a parallel between knowledge and petroleum. In the early 1800s, petroleum was a nuisance. It fouled the drinking water and got on farmers' boots. Then, in 1854, a Canadian geologist figured out how to extract kerosene from petroleum, and the headlines read, "Good news for whales." All of a sudden, petroleum was a resource. Today, we have a variety of petroleum engineering disciplines for making use of petroleum. We have ways to locate the petroleum, assay its quality, extract it, process it, and use it. We can form a similar list for knowledge as a resource. We can identify sources of expertise, assay the quality and value of the knowledge, extract the knowledge, codify it, and apply it as well. Therefore, we can talk about a discipline of knowledge engineering. Organizations interested in taking advantage of their own expertise could use knowledge engineering to create a culture of expertise. Doesn't that sound awesome? Doesn't that sound like the Federalist wet dream? We can use cognitive task analysis to perform knowledge engineering. The first step is to identify sources of expertise. People who have been in an organization for a while will have accumulated some experience worth capturing. We usually find that there is not one expert. Rather, different people know worthwhile things in different areas. The job of cognitive task analysis is to focus on the expertise, not the experts. The aim is to find individuals whose experience is respected in the organization in order to learn how they see their job. Step 2 is to assay the knowledge. Cognitive task analysis takes time and effort. No one would start such a project if there was not a compelling need or benefit in the first place, and many don't. Many companies, this is the first thing that goes. This is the first department that gets cut. Any kind of knowledge management, any kind of knowledge expertise management, any kind of training, it gets cut. It's seen as worthless. Once we have identified the sources of expertise, we can again evaluate the value of the project. Following the parallel to petroleum engineering, just because we have found oil does not mean we should start drilling. We have to examine the difficulty and the cost of the drilling against the quality of the oil. If it is low grade and difficult to extract, we leave it in the ground. The importance of the knowledge has to be balanced against the costs of extracting it. The cost of extracting knowledge can be considerable. Interviews, transcriptions, analyses, methods for representing the knowledge, and then the cost of distributing the lessons learned. What is the payoff of the project? Who will gain and by how much? Half of those tasks can be done by AI now. 0 man hours required. Totally automated. Knowledge management is one of those tasks that can be completely automated by some large language model, some suite like Perplexity AI. They host like all these suites. You can get speech to text. You can do transcription. You can create some kind of like sentiment analysis on it. You can create what do they call that? It's like you break it down into the different. Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank. But anyways, you can segment it into different speech diacritics, whatever. You can break it up into different speakers and figure out who's speaking based on one stream of audio. It can assign roles to the speakers, and you can gather like what their role is in the conversation. You can segment it between different ideas. There's so much you can do with AI right now. This is like the perfect, I guess, application of it. In some settings, cognitive task analysis is a good investment. Several years ago, AT&T started a project to build a course to train software developers to become more proficient at debugging and troubleshooting. AT&T spends a lot of money each year on software development and troubleshooting, so the course had definite benefits. Because the corporation planned to present the course to many software engineers, it decided that investing in making the course as strong as possible was worthwhile. Under these circumstances, knowledge engineering was cost-effective. AT&T hired us to interview 15 skilled technical people and to use these interviews as a basis for the 2-day program. The reaction to the effort was quite positive. Some of the training developers believed that this was the strategy they should use in preparing future courses, going back into the company and taking advantage of internal expertise. The third step is to extract the knowledge. Cognitive task analysis methods have been developed for getting inside the heads of experts. These methods include structured interviews, interviews about actual events that were challenging, interviews about the concepts experts use to think about a task, and simulated tasks that require the expert to think aloud during performance or respond to interview questions after completion. In the next chapter, I described one of these methods in greater detail, the use of stories about challenging events to elicit knowledge from experts. Step 4 is to codify the knowledge. We've seen and used many different ways to represent the knowledge elicited. Applied researchers use diagrams, charts, lists of critical cues, computer simulations of the expert's thought processes, annotated stories, transcripts of interviews, even videotapes of interviews. In the project for AT&T, the course developers used the stories as part of the materials for the new course. For the neonatal, what was it? The neonatal intensive care unit project, so the NICU project. Some instructional materials were developed to train the detection of sepsis. They presented the incident accounts, the stories, and noted the critical cues. In this way, the cues were presented within a context, making them easier to understand and to use. When we tested the ability of nursing students to remember the cues to sepsis, we found a high level of recall, even after several weeks. It is often useful to identify the decision requirements, the key decisions and how they are made of the task. For each decision requirement, we show why it is difficult and the cues and strategies that experts use to get around the difficulty. These decision requirements can be cross-referenced to actual incidents. Anyone wanting more detail can follow an audit trail back to the interviews and incidents that were used to identify the decision requirements. The final step is to apply the knowledge. We have already covered a range of examples of how cognitive task analysis can be applied. The stories, diagrams, tables, and lists of critical cues have all played a role in one project or another. They have been used to identify key cues for diagnoses of sepsis, to train nurses to recognize these cues, to provide cognitive modeling of the troubleshooting strategies of expert programmers, and to show system designers what essential decisions have to be supported by interfaces. Cognitive task analysis is a method for capturing expertise and making it accessible for training and system design. Other forms of application may be better selection methods and better methods for building a corporate memory. One type of application we have not covered is the use of cognitive task analysis to provide guidance for organizations that want to cut down on expensive schoolhouse training. Formal training does not always transfer to the workplace. I was just talking about this on my Twitter feed. There are lots and lots of foreigners who come to America seeking employment in the tech sector, and they have extensive credentials. They have credentials that you and I would probably, spend $200,000 for, but they usually get a free ride or some shit because they're brown or whatever. But they get these scholarships. They come over here, they get the 5-year degree, and then they apply for like junior level jobs because all the senior level jobs are taken. There's just only a limited amount of positions. The tech sector is only so big in America, and there's only so many slots open in senior levels. So it all filters down into the junior roles. So you have these people with 5-year degrees trying to get junior roles, and it pushes out all the white guys. It pushes out every single one of the applicants who's like an actual American. And it's this overskilled, and it's what we were talking about earlier in the chapter. It's these bureaucrats essentially who have all the formal training but none of the experience. They learned all the rules of the trade. They went to university. They went to Temple. They went to all these nice schools. They went to Duke. They went to Carnegie Mellon for whatever. They got their doctorates. They're geniuses. All right, they're super geniuses. They have their super genius certificate. Look, this guy's a super genius because he has the piece of paper. You put them in a position to work and to like, hey, you're gonna rewrite this database architecture. Hey, you're gonna re-architecture our database. They look at you like you're retarded. They've never done it before. They don't even know what that means. So why the fuck are we going to pay these guys salaries? Why would you pay some brown person $200,000 a year when you can get some sophomore, some junior out of college, and they're doing like a 6-month certificate program. They're doing a 6-week boot camp, man. They spent a quarter. They spent 3 months doing a boot camp. They spent 90 days doing a boot camp, a software boot camp. Web development boot camp. I don't care what it is, database management boot camp, and they come out and they actually have practical experience. And they're brand new. They don't know their ass from their head. They're basically useless. But hey, you can pay them a lot less, and you can train them, and they're not going to leave. These guys, these like $200,000 salary brown people with the 5-year degrees, they'll trade up as soon as they get the chance. They will go back to their home country and they'll set sail for their own home country, and they'll take everything that you taught them and just apply it at home. And then they'll take over whatever tech sector over there. They'll become the monopoly, whatever. Good for them. I don't fucking care. They're not American. They do all this all the time. And what happens is like, you hire a white guy, you hire the guy down the road, and you pay him a little bit less than you would, these, because he doesn't have the 5-year degree. I'm not saying that you have to pay him less because he's white. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying you pay him less because he doesn't have the experience and he doesn't have the credentials. So you give him the experience, and maybe he doesn't need the credentials. Maybe he actually performs better than the the 5-year degree student with the all the flawed priors, all the preconceived notions about how database management is supposed to go, and you have to untrain it. You have to teach him how to do it the right way, which involves making him forget everything, doing it the wrong way, which is like it's twice as long. It takes twice as long, and you're like fighting their instincts that were taught to them for 5 years. So it's an uphill battle, and these people are not loyal. They, yeah, maybe some of them are. I'm not going to speak on an individual basis, but generally they will go as soon as they get everything they need from you. As soon as they get one foot in another place, they'll be gone. So you don't even get your institutional knowledge. You don't even get your tribal knowledge. You don't have an expert anymore. They're gone, and you spend $200,000 a year to keep them. It's over. So train the little guy. Train the guy with who just wants the little bit of experience to pad out his resume because he did the 6-month boot camp, and he knows more than the 5-year degree program Southeast Asian who's just going to leave to go back to Sri Lanka in 6 months. So fuck them. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, many organizations rely on direct experience, on-the-job training. Yes, I am 100% a supporter of on-the-job training as the primary vehicle for instruction. However, as little is known about the way skilled coworkers and managers actually provide on-the-job training. Yeah, usually because there's not a lot of funding in those environments. Usually it's like haphazard and it's ad hoc and it's done on the fly. We have a document in our system. We have literally a document called tribal knowledge. It's everything that I keep in my head that if I weren't there and something went wrong, or they were trying to do something new, or they they had to do something that they usually would ask me how to do it. It's all tribal knowledge. They have to go reference this diagram or the sheet that I have. That's everything that I've learned over the last 10 years of software development, that it would take them months to even Google it, to even start to look for it. Let alone like figure out what the hell they're supposed to do with that knowledge. It's like all the idiosyncrasies of years of development, of doing it the wrong way 10 different times. Because it's hard. It's hard to do these things. It's hard when you have deadlines to do things the right way the first time. Because these are tasks that take 6 months. These are tasks that take 2 years to write out and build out, applications for this stuff. So we have our own tribal knowledge board, and these guys, I don't know how much they use it, but like that's the only way I can like say is codified, or like what's the word I'm looking for? It's like man, what is the word? Yeah, codified, or like the word's on the tip of my tongue. It's killing me. It's like the professional way of doing, I guess. There's not much you can do. The on-the-job training is just like contextual. It is that inhabited knowledge. It is that experiential knowledge. And he called it something earlier, but yeah, it's like something you can only give someone through experience. So Beth Crandall and Caroline Zambach have completed several studies of OJT, so on-the-job training, and examining the way people teach perceptual skills rather than merely procedures for operating equipment. They found that the skilled coaches and OJT providers work very differently from classroom instructors in terms of how they watch the novices, assess what the novices are seeing, and introspect to show the novices the way that they are looking at the task. Yeah, that is so true. I do not feel like a school teacher when I'm teaching these guys. When I'm laying down the knowledge, when I'm laying down the game on these guys, I do not feel like a school teacher. I feel more like I feel more like a peer. I feel more like what would you call it? Like you're revealing the world to them. You're like exploring it with them for the first time. So it feels more like a journey than some kind of thing that's going on in a classroom, some kind of like curriculum. Beth found that the tutoring for nurses in a hospital intensive care unit centered on procedures and equipment operation. The tutoring was very spotty regarding the perceptual aspects of expertise. As a result, the trainees felt ill-prepared, and this feeling of inadequacy may have contributed to the high turnover rates. Because recruitment and trainings are so expensive, turnover is a problem in hospitals. However, the nurses identified as tutors were never trained themselves to describe perceptual skills or to enhance the development of perceptual expertise in the trainees. By looking at the opportunities for perceptual training, Beth and Caroline have developed a strategy for teaching skilled workers to do a better job of providing OJT. We have had good success in setting up OJT programs, particularly for the LA County Fire Department, to help prepare captains to bring new firefighters quickly up to speed. Caroline Zambach and Rebecca Plisk, PLISKE, set up an OJT program for an international franchise company of small retail stores. The problem was that product quality and customer service were uneven. After the program was set up, the store managers and staff members reported that performance of the new employees had improved. In addition, for the 7 months following training, the stores with the OJT program increased their sales per month by an average of $24,000 per store compared to the same period in the previous year. In a matched set of stores that had not established the OJT program, the monthly increase in sales averaged only $10,000 per store. Another area of application for cognitive task analysis is market research. We do not think of consumers as experts, but we can still use cognitive task analysis to understand the way consumers make judgments and decisions. Market researchers prefer to use structured questionnaires and interviews, sampling respondents from different market segments. The research based on laboratory methods is sound. Unfortunately, the results of these surveys provide limited insight into how the consumers are making their decisions. Another approach to market research is to run focus groups, collections of consumers who are invited to talk and respond informally. This approach is more useful for gaining a sense of the consumer's thinking processes, but it still does not allow the researcher to probe deeply. Pause. We have had several opportunities to use cognitive task analysis to identify consumers' decision strategies. Laura Militello has led these projects. In one market research project, we were told that the company already had all the answers it needed, including a satisfactory model of the consumer's decision-making. Yeah, I bet they did. The sponsor did not expect us to add anything new, especially since we had not been working in the area of interest. The only reason to enlist our help was that the project was so important that she wanted to make sure her group had not missed anything. 2 weeks later, Laura's team conducted 2 days of in-depth cognitive task analysis interviews with individual consumers. At the end of the 2 days, the sponsors who watched behind one-way mirrors had learned more than they expected. These detailed descriptions of how, when, and why purchase decisions are made could not be obtained via questionnaire data. The sponsor convened her team, described the results of our interviews, and began to formulate an action plan based on our findings. We're almost done here. I got one more section left. We're at the key points. Cognitive task analysis will not always be this successful, but it is an important supplement and alternative to the quantitative methods used in the field of market research. Here's the key points. Experts can perceive things that are invisible to novices, find discriminations, patterns, alternate perspectives, missing events, the past and the future, and the process of managing decision-making activities. Skilled chess players show high-quality moves, even under extreme time pressure, and high-quality moves as the first ones that they consider. Training to high skill levels should emphasize perceptual skills along with mastery of procedures. And that's that, baby. We finished chapter 10. It only took 2.5 hours, but that was a good chapter. That elicited a lot from me towards the middle. That was good. I'm really happy with the chapter 10. That was probably one of the better chapters of the book. Chapter 5 was great. Chapter 10's been really good. The Jordan Peterson video, I don't even know if it went to the Jumbotron ever. What the hell, man? Yeah, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of Elon's Twitter. It's scuffed, man. But anyways, yeah, I see you, Stimmy, in here. I don't know if you have anything to add, if you want to bring anything to the discussion before we close it out. But next week, I guess it is Sunday, so technically next week, we'll be reading The Power of Stories, chapter 11. I think that'll probably be a good one. I don't think it's going to be as boring as the last one. Chapter 9 was really bad, but yeah, if you guys have anything to add, feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to end the space. Give you like 10 seconds while I drink some water. Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening. Thanks for stopping by. Hope you got something out of it. Replay gang, if you're listening to this, thank you for listening on AF Spaces. Go support Tino if you can. But thanks for listening. Have a good night, guys. And I'll catch you next time. Have a good rest of your night.